Okay, welcome everybody. I'm just going to give it till 1:03 p.m. here Pacific, and then we'll get rolling. Okay, welcome everyone to the California Air Resources Board Public Workshop to discuss our potential off-road phased advanced clean equipment regulation, or what we're now calling PACE. This is the same program that we had talked about in the context of the state implementation plan as the Targeted Manufacturer Rule, or TMR. And I'd just like to start with some introductions. So my name is Kim Heroy Rogalski, and I'm chief of the Mobile Source Regulatory Development Branch in the Mobile Source Control Division at CARB. And we are the branch that recently brought to the board the zero emission forklift regulation. We also did the heavy duty omnibus regulation, and we implement the in-use off-road diesel vehicle regulation. I wanted to give a pitch to one related project before I kick it over to the PACE team to introduce themselves. And that is our off-road implementation section, the same folks that implement the in-use off-road regulation. Currently have a request for information out where we're soliciting comments and suggestions and ideas for developing a clean off-road fleet recognition program. So something that would somehow formally recognize fleets that are making lots of efforts to get their emissions down as much as possible and use as much zero emission equipment as possible. I'm going to drop the link for that request for information, or RFI, in the chat. And we certainly welcome anyone here or anyone that you want to forward that to that you think would have any expertise or opinions on that. We would love to hear from folks about that. Okay. I'll make sure that link is in there correctly. I'm not sure that worked. But with that, so I'm Kim, and let me hand it to David Chen, and then folks can keep introducing themselves. David?
Sorry, trying to unmute myself. Yeah, I'm David Chen. I'm a section manager here in the Mobile Source Control Division of CARB, and I'm assisting in kicking off the development of this measure. Thank you.
Thanks, David. My name is Matt. I'm the air pollution specialist and lead staff on this PACE measure. I'd like to introduce the rest of the team who will be part of the PACE measure and also helping us out with today's meeting. We have with us Lori Berard, who is an staff air pollution specialist. We have Henry Chung, who is an air resources engineer. Duncan Smedley, who's an air pollution specialist. Zachary Kreider, who's an air pollution specialist, as well as Keith Roderick, who's a air resources engineer. With that, I would like to remind everybody that today's webinar is being recorded. We will post a link to the recording on our meetings and events page for the PACE measure within the next week or so. With that, I would ask we advance to our next slide, please. Some logistics for our Zoom meeting today. Staff are going to run through the entire presentation, and we will respond to comments and questions at the end. We're going to respond to raised hands first. We have instructions for how to raise your hand either in the Zoom platform, or if you're calling in by phone, you can press #2 to raise hand and *6 to unmute or mute yourself. Please, as a reminder, to state your name and affiliation before asking a question or making a comment, both verbally and in the written platform today. We'd really appreciate that. All right, with that, I would ask us to advance to our next slide, please. For today's agenda, we're going to give some background on why we're here, what is the PACE measure. We're going to discuss what is staff's proposed concepts and considerations currently. We're going to touch upon infrastructure and talk about some next steps. Next slide, please. First, we're going to discuss background. Next slide, please. So California has, for a very long time, had considerable air pollution issues, both from toxics and smog-forming emissions. And we continue to have that problem today. There are many, many geographic areas of the state of California that continue to have air quality that exceeds the allowable federal standards, and will continue to do for some time. And because of that, we need to look at additional measures to further reduce air pollution and its disproportionate impact on low-income and disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. We have this slide and the next one with some pie charts to discuss why off-road emissions are a significant contribution to the overall makeup of emissions in the state. And as you can see on the pie chart on the left, off-road is about 25% approximately of the oxide of nitrogen contribution, and about 11% on the right side of the particulate matter contributions for the current year. Next slide, please. To further drill down into the off-road emissions profile, we wanted to highlight what this looks like for just the off-road emissions, and also to call out something that we don't talk about a lot, but portable emissions, and specifically in the generator power space. This is a category that is uniquely one equipment type and has an overall fairly large impact on the overall emissions for both NOx and particulate matter. Next slide, please. We have a couple of drivers that are coming both from the legislature and the governor, additionally, on some very large goals for us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as a state and to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. And most recently, we have Governor Newsom's executive order N7920, which directed CARB to try to achieve 100% zero emissions for both new and in-use equipment by 2035 where feasible, including in off-road. Next slide, please. Let's get into a little bit of the background about the PACE measure. And first, we're going to describe what this is. This measure is a manufacturer-directed rule concept. We proposed this, as Kim indicated at the beginning of this presentation, as something that was included in the state chapter of the state implementation plan. For manufacturers to produce for sale zero-emission equipment, powertrains as a portion of their annual sales volume in the state. This would potentially be a sales mandate or production target based on what we see as both the technical economic feasibility of zero-emission technology in the off-road universe. And just to reiterate, this was previously known, if you're looking up in the existing SIP, this was known as the target manufacturer rule. And in that write-up, we propose going to the board for this measure in 2027 for their consideration, with proposed implementation starting in 2031. Next slide, please. So outside of this, our staff in Air Quality Planning and Science Division who does our inventory, has been collecting a very long list now of different equipment models that we're seeing in the off-road space. These are hybrid, range extended, or zero emission technologies. And what we're starting to see is there's a fair amount of models that are coming online throughout the world. But a lot of these are in kind of low to modest horsepower regimes. And that's given us some insights into where the market is starting to evolve, but also where there's gaps. And we're going to talk about some of that as we talk about some of the proposal in the coming slides here. And we also have a link at the bottom of this if folks are interested in taking a look at what is currently included. If there's things that we're missing, if there are products that you think we should be adding to this, we'd also like feedback on that. Next slide, please. CARB for many, many years has been making long-term investments across a wide spectrum of equipment types, and this includes off-road. We have a number of different ways in which we make investments early on in the demonstration and pilot phase, through the voucher phase of early commercialization, as well as from equipment that is mature in the market and there's confidence for programs to have customers do scrap and replace of existing equipment. And this slide highlights just the diverse portfolio of what we have overall for the agency in that space. In the next couple slides, we'll talk about some of the individual programs of where we've and how we funded off-road development. Next slide, please. As I spoke to briefly, our off-road demos and pilots has been around for more than 10 years now. Over 700 million has been infused into it. With at least a one-to-one match, we're looking at over $1.4 billion. Of that 700 million, at least 170 million has gone to off-road specific projects. And this has been utilized in a number of different categories, from yard trucks, cargo handling equipment, ferries, locomotives, agriculture and construction, and even now moving into mobile and temporary energy storage systems. These numbers don't include some of the most recent solicitation announcements, by the way, that we're in the process of being funded. Next slide, please. The other program I want to highlight is our Clean Off-Road Equipment Voucher Incentive Program, otherwise known as CORE. This program has been in existence since 2019 and first launched in 2020. $240 million in vouchers has already been funded, with more that is in the pipeline for equipment. And I've highlighted some of the off-road categories that have consistently been oversubscribed since the program's inception. It's become a very popular program for helping get a lot of stakeholders to pilot, demo, and start to transition their fleets towards zero emission equipment. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to transition from our background to talking about some of the considerations that we have in our concept for the proposed PACE measure. Next slide, please. On this slide, we've outlined at a high level what staff are thinking about in terms of our approach. For the first phase that we're currently thinking that could be a potential way to approach this for the off-road universe is to first look at portable generators, excluding those that are already subject to our small off-road engine regulation, as well as mobile off-road equipment that is greater than 130 kilowatts in power and has been demonstrated in applications where it's generally feasible. Later, looking at more equipment types, again in that greater than 130 kilowatt space. Then finally, third phase of looking at equipment that is in the less than 130 kilowatt space. Going back to the first phase real quick, why portable generators? A lot of people may be asking. We see this as a real opportunity to get early emission reductions in this space. A lot of generators are sized for peak, yet operate at much lower outputs. Pairing these units with energy storage or going to fuel cell units, again, potentially paired with energy storage, can have a real potential to reduce emissions early and start to normalize this, as looking at the infrastructure first in the off-road space, so we can get early emission reductions and start to look at other ways that this equipment can further support more emission reductions through other mobile equipment as those pieces become electrified in the future. The other thing I want to point out is that, depending on, we may be looking at these as likely separate regulations, but depending on how we learn and different products come to market, things could be changed up here. The other thing I want to highlight is one of the reasons we were looking at going after the categories of equipment below 130 kilowatts is that we already see a lot of product in this space, and we're looking to move the needle in those larger, tougher categories of equipment to get more population of equipment and more products out there for consumers to look at and choose. Next slide, please. So to further expand on our potential approach, this regulation, has the potential to apply to equipment and powertrain manufacturers. One option the staff are currently exploring is a percentage of portfolio requirement, where we'd have some increasing annual requirement that a percentage of a manufacturer's total sales be zero emission. An alternative approach that we also think may merit discussion is a more stringent NOx standard that would drive further zero emission equipment production. And we're open to other suggestions that stakeholders have as ways in which we can maximize emission reductions potential with PACE program. Next slide, please. Some other considerations that we have are listed on this slide. Some of these are what we take into account for many of our regulatory measures. Cost and economic impact are always important, as is the feasibility for both manufacturers and fleets to use the equipment. Infrastructure, again, mobile, temporary, and fixed infrastructure is something we're going to have as part of our discussions, given the nature of how off-road equipment is utilized. And we're very aware that there's impacts from other regulations, specifically a regulation that's running in a parallel lane, our Tier 5 off-road compression ignition engine standard regulation. Also, small business impacts of what our potential proposals may have on the stakeholder group, as well as environmental justice and disadvantaged community impacts, fairness level playing field for manufacturers, given the diversity of different portfolios that each manufacturer in the off-road space may have, as well as implementation and enforceability of the measure. Next slide, please. Other considerations, we really want to get feedback from stakeholders on, is there space to, what are the pros and cons, and is there space to have, powertrain versus equipment requirements for this measure? Additionally, what should the roles of hybrid, plug-in, and range extend technologies be for PACE as well? We know that a lot of this equipment is very long-lived in the heavy iron space, and we want to hear what should we be thinking about in terms of the potential to acknowledge those who are making hybrid or zero-emission powertrain conversion kits to be included in this discussion as well. Certification is something that comes up when we talk about requiring manufacturers to make equipment. We've previously looked at zero-emission powertrain certification in the on-road space. Is that something that we should be also looking for, or should that be something we should consider at the equipment level for this measure? And lastly, if we were to consider a credit system, should this be something that we do for those tougher, harder applications to help manufacturers have flexibility potentially in meeting some or all of our requirements? Next slide, please. So what are we looking to get out of this? At a high level, our proposal is looking to achieve emission reductions via increased zero-emission deployment in the off-road space. Looking to accelerate the introduction of existing zero-emission equipment types where they aren't currently available in California. We're also looking to accelerate zero-emission deployments in equipment types where we don't currently have a lot of options. And overall, we're looking to increase the product availability in this sector. And lastly, we're looking at ways in which we can, through this measure, try to achieve lower costs, more competition, and increases in product quality and reliability. Next slide, please. As we discussed briefly before, staff are committed and aware, and we'll be coordinating internally on the intersections of PACE and other measures on how we can achieve as great of emission reductions as possible. And if stakeholders have ideas and ways in which we can increase the emission reduction potential given these intersections, we are very open to those inputs and discussions. Next slide, please. Pivoting now, we're going to talk a little bit about infrastructure. Next slide. So CARB has a collaboratory agreement and commitment with both the California Energy Commission and the California Public Utilities Commission to support the planning and forecasting that is needed for this transition towards electrified California. And there's a real commitment that we have to having information exchanges, looking at forecasts, looking at the needs of the different equipment types. And I just want to make sure that it's clear to stakeholders that we are, as much as possible, coordinating collaboratively on what we're looking to propose, and also relaying that through our sister agencies who are looking at the space for the infrastructure side of this equation. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to talk about what we have in our mind as some next steps. Next slide. So over the coming weeks and months, staff are going to be looking to engage with stakeholders one-on-one and in groups, including manufacturers, technology providers, and industry representatives, non-governmental organizations, users, as well as community groups and others interested in this measure. We're looking to set up a couple of work groups. We currently have 3 topics that we think would be worthy to have specific work groups on. The first is looking at portable equipment and what is available and potential in the zero emission space. The next is going to be mobile equipment that is greater than 130 kilowatts, as well as what is available in the hybrid and range extended world for equipment. And related to this, we're looking to send out 1 or more requests for information that will be a process to solicit written information from stakeholders and have another way to engage and for us to learn. And these topics could include product availability, equipment feasibility, and infrastructure needs, as well as cost information. So we encourage stakeholders to provide us feedback on what this, are we hitting the right targets? Are there other things we should be considering as we look to have our future public work groups and engagements? Next slide, please. Lastly, I want to put my contact information as well as Lori Broad, who's our current acting supervisor. This is in addition to those who, if you want to reach out to the pace@arb.ca.gov email that we also monitor. Next slide, please. And also, just as a reminder, this is the website for the PACE measure. And I want to encourage everybody who is interested in following this measure to subscribe to the PACE specific email distribution list, either on our website. There's a left-hand navigation link that says subscribe, or via the link that's provided here. In the future, it is likely that we will be reducing the very broad audience that we captured with this announcement to just the PACE specific email distribution list. So again, please take your time to subscribe if you're interested in following this. And with that, I would like to transition to our questions and answers.
Okay, so I believe we might start with spoken questions first.
Yes.
So if you have any questions, please make sure you raise your hand, and we will call on you and give you the permission to speak, at which time you can unmute your mic, state your name and your affiliation, and then you can proceed with your question. So we'll start with the first question now. First question is from Nathan Berger. I have given you permission to speak. You can state your name, your affiliation, and your question. And also unmute your mic. Nathan Berger. Okay, Nathan Berger, are you there?
I have no question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we will now move on to the next person. Next question is from Terry Manis. I've given you permission to speak. You may unmute your mic and state your question. State your name and affiliation and your question.
Hello, my name is Terry Mannies and I'm from Orange EV. We're out here in Kansas. Hi. We manufacture electric terminal trucks, and I'm just wondering if terminal trucks are going to fall underneath this particular rule when it's set up. That's my question. Thanks.
Thanks for that question, Terry. I don't know off the top of my head. Kim, do you happen to know if under the advanced clean truck rule, if those are already captured?
I'm not 100% sure. I think we'll have to circle on that.
Yeah. But Terry, to maybe ask you, are there spaces that I think you might know this space a little bit more than I might at the moment. Are there places that jar trucks are used but not currently required to be going zero emission that we may want to consider?
Are there places that they're used but not required to be zero emission? Well,
yeah, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, I know that we are in the process of getting our powertrains and everything registered so that we can provide credits on the ACT market. Does that sound right? So I know that we're in that space. It's hard for us to know, well, me to know if I mean, that's all we manufacture is EV, as you guys know. So I'm not really I mean, we're not really regulated anywhere right now. We're not, as far as, because that's all we do is EV.
Got it.
So I know we have absolutely just been able to pay attention to the whole ACT program and all of the things associated with advanced clean fleets and everything because we are a potential source of points and credits. So that's kind of why we've been paying attention.
Got it.
So we just checked with our advanced clean fleet team, and I believe that the type of trucks you're talking about, even though they're not driving on they're not license plated and driving on highways. I think they are covered by ACT and ACF, and therefore our intent would not be to cover them here. So we're not trying to double cover a source that's already included in ACT or ACF. And for others, ACT is advanced clean trucks, which is a requirement on manufacturers to make a certain portion of what they sell. In California, ZE and advanced clean fleets is the companion measure that requires owners of trucks to gradually be obtaining zero emission on-road trucks. But thanks for that question. It was a great one, given that we had to check.
And I know that we can help offset issues. I just wasn't sure. Yeah. Anyway, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Terry.
All right. The next question is from Jacqueline Moore. Oh, wait. Sorry. Okay, Jacqueline Moore, I have given you permission to speak, and you may state your name, affiliation, and your question now.
Hello, my name is Jacqueline Moore, and I'm from the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association. I represent shippers and terminal operators on the West Coast. First of all, Matthew, thank you for the presentation. Interesting concept here. And yes, the yard trucks that Orange GB was talking about is included as part of the trucking regulations. What I wanted to ask is about other cargo handling equipment, right? So top handlers, that sort of heavy duty equipment, could that be part of the scope since it's not currently under a regulation that requires zero emissions? That's first part of my question.
Okay. We do have a group at CARB that is looking to further emission reductions at ports and intermodal rail yards for cargo handling equipment. And I believe that zero emission is one of their main focuses. If there's applications outside of those type of spaces, I could see that being something we could potentially consider looping into this if that fits within the phases. If those equipment types are greater than 130 kilowatts.
Okay, so it sounds like because the CHU rule will be undergoing amendments soon, eventually, it would not be considered for PACE.
We'll be having a lot of coordination to make sure that we're not overlapping, but we also want to make sure that we're doing complementary efforts. With again, an emphasis on manufacturers for this.
Yes. So final question. Have you considered hydrogen ICE, so internal combustion engine, for this particular concept? You talked about one concept being a new, more stringent NOx standard. So would hydrogen ICE be of interest for this particular regulation?
We do not consider combustion technologies to be under the umbrella of zero emission, and that is not part of this proposal. I believe that there's a hydrogen internal combustion engine can be certified for a manufacturer to get potential emission credits via our combustion certification pathways.
So in the percent portfolio requirements that you outlined, it talks specifically about NOx standard to drive greater ZE equipment. So is it eligible or not then? Because it is talking about a NOx standard when hydrogen ICE could get to 0.04.
At this time, we're not looking to mix the combustion technologies into the world that we're looking at as being true zero emission, that being battery electric or fuel cell electric technologies.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Okay. The next question comes from Dean Taylor. I have given you permission to speak. You state your name, affiliation, your question now.
Hi, my name is Dean Taylor with California Electric Transportation Coalition. My question is about power takeoff. It seems like it's could be considered on-road or it could be considered off-road. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry where trucks have equipment on board, usually like a battery that can basically be like a portable generator and do a lot of different things. It's a pretty big market. So where is this handled at CARB? I know we've talked to some manufacturers that are very interested in making a lot of progress in this area, but it seems like it kind of falls through the cracks at CARB.
That's an interesting point. So for all these power takeoffs, are you looking at this as a on-road certified truck that provides power takeoff to drive some off-road implement?
Basically, yeah. I mean, as you know, they move around, so they're the truck. Take like a utility bucket truck as an example. I mean, it moves around. It can when it's stationary, it can provide all electric services, a bunch of different things, be it a boom or all kinds of different equipment could be powered by it. But how is it regulated? Is it covered under the potential upcoming PACE rule or somewhere else? Or what's your thoughts on how to handle that? It's pretty big industry, in the multi-billions of dollars and lots of product out there.
I believe that our advanced clean truck regulation is likely something that is captured, this in part. I don't know. I will probably take this back to discuss with them a little bit more in detail to find out. But our advanced clean truck regulation at high level is moving, roughly class 3 through 8, if I'm not mistaken, to towards zero emission. They do have pathways for, I think, range extended vehicles as a part of that as well. And I can find out and we can get back to you on where power takeoff comes into the mix.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and we can dig into that further. I also want to go back just momentarily to the question from Terry of Orange EV, who was asking about yard tractors. I think we're going to need to circle and dig into that a little bit more. Apparently, on and off-road yard tractors are covered by the Advanced Clean Fleet rule, but only the on-road ones are covered by Advanced Clean Truck rule. So I think it's an excellent question, and we just need to make sure to sort through, do they belong under PACE, or would that be kind of duplicating efforts? So I just wanted to clarify, because what I said before wasn't 100% right. Let me also, while I've got the floor here, just go back. We had one other question. Our practice here is for any questions that people are typing in, we're going to read them out and then answer them verbally, just so everyone gets to hear all the questions and all the answers. So we did have a question from the beginning from Alfred Voskan, who asked, does this workshop also address small off-road equipment, or what CARB calls SOAR? And no, it doesn't. So this workshop's all about PACE, not about SOAR.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Next question is from Christian Bisher. I have given you permission to speak. You may state your name, affiliation, and your question.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Christian with the Central California Environmental Justice Network. And I was curious about the ag equipment. You listed the 29 models are currently available. I was wondering if I could get that information somewhere on your website, or if it could be shared with me later. And then
Sure.
in your phases, is in the second phase or the third phase, is that where some of that ag equipment would be potentially looked at?
Well, first, Duncan, can you move the slide deck to that slide that highlights the advanced clean equipment list, please? A little further. A little further. There it is. So Christian, at the bottom of this page, we have a link that goes to a document that contains more information than what is provided here. I believe that in this space, you can get quite a bit more information on the exact models and manufacturers that are captured.
All right, thank you.
Duncan, if you can go to the three-phase slide. To answer your question, maybe. If there are applications where we see that it may make sense, for equipment in the off-road space, ag or otherwise, I think we'd be open to understand what that looks like. And if there's applications that you're aware of, we would love to hear about that. We know that there's a lot of equipment that is, manufactured, and it can go into construction, ag, or other use cases. And we would like to find out, what are people utilizing it for today? And if there are applications in ag, we'd love to hear that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, next question is from Nathan Gustafson. I have given you permission to speak. You may state your name, affiliation, and your question.
Gustafson from Vermeer Corporation. I'm a senior systems engineer in the electrification space. We have some interest in electrification in the realm of large wood waste processing equipment, mining equipment, and utility installation equipment. in those larger spaces, we've got some prototypes in development, but one thing that we're struggling with is probably pure battery powered at those power scales. You mentioned in your phases and your concepts here that you are considering some hybrid options. I'd like to know from your perspective a little bit more about what you think might work from a hybrid option, and from Vermeer's standpoint, is there anything that PACE you think will do to incentivize the purchase of hybrid machines that use traditional technologies like batteries and electric motors to decrease overall fuel burn and engine usage, but not eliminate it? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So it is a technology that we're considering. In the portable space, in generators, I see there being options for certain fleets to eliminate generators altogether, as depending on their site needs. I see there being options for sizing an energy storage system, for example, of batteries to take care of peak loads and being backed up either by the grid connection or a downsize, right size generator. And the ability to directly buffer a grid connection through an energy storage system to also eliminate the need for otherwise internal combustion powered generator. In terms of other equipment types, I think we're very much in a learning process right now. We want to hear from the experts like you and others of what you're seeing, what you're seeing as some of your technical or cost limitations for your products and where your customers are at in the industry. And what should we be cognizant of as we develop this regulation is to give some credit, no credit, or something else to acknowledge that some applications, it's may be more challenging than others to go zero.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And some of the things you alluded to are interesting. I think we just want to keep it in our minds because, we have development cycles we have to have in mind too, before we can realistically get equipment to market. So, if you guys feel like you want to incentive push towards manufacturers having a certain number of zero emission pieces of equipment, or there's a way you can say, well, we're going to say specifically you have to reduce your nitrous oxide emissions or something like that, then I think we just want to be ahead of the game there. And also, really just capitalize on this from our perspective. We want to know what machines are going to be incentivized and what to focus on. So appreciate that.
Yes, and if it makes sense to go and look at specific equipment types versus allowing manufacturers, more freedom to choose, based on their individual portfolio of what you manufacture and what your customers' needs are, we'd be open to that as well.
What's the best way to provide feedback? Just these email addresses that you've kind of provided here on the PowerPoint?
All of these, connections, either the PACE email or mine, are great ways to engage with us individually, or depending on what your preference is, individually or through associations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan.
And I just want to flag to really appreciate the comments from Vermeer. If there's anyone here, a lot of times people would feel more comfortable talking to us privately rather than in front of 400 other people, including possibly their competitors. So if anyone, has some ideas but wants to set up a private meeting with us, we'd more than happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Kevin Brown. I'm giving you permission to speak. You may state your name, affiliation, and your question.
It's Kevin Brown with Mika Clean Mobility. Hi, Kim and Matt. A question. With regard to slide 16, when might you be able to provide examples of how a more stringent NOx standard might be used to drive zero emissions equipment production? Anyways, there's a whole bunch of variants of that. It's a pretty complex topic. So when do you think you might be able to say more about it?
I'm not sure. Right now, again, we're kind of in this learning phase. We wanted to offer this as a potential alternative to just a straight percentage of a manufacturer's total approach. If there's ways in which you or others in the industry feel that there's a path we should look at, we'd be open to that. But we are looking at an emphasis on getting more zero emission equipment out there. We have other regulations that are looking at cleaning up the internal combustion engines that are utilized in this equipment.
Right, right. And it's, the advances in zero emissions equipment are happening quite quickly. You're right, where they've really progressed at a high number of model availabilities with the small equipment, whereas the medium and the large are a little different, and there'll probably be opportunities in the future to talk about that. But the idea of how to use credits to drive zero emissions equipment production it's complex pretty quickly, because it's a question of is a NOx standard the best, or is it best to come up with some sort of carbon-based standard? Because the ultimate goal is decarbonization, and how do you come up with a system where the credits can work between, say, engine manufacturers, zero emissions powertrain manufacturers, maybe other low carbon powertrain equipment that's approved, or equipment manufacturers. You got all these different levels of who might play in those credits, and that just creates dynamics that are people would want to understand pretty quick, so they can help guide investments.
I can understand and appreciate that. And if just to reiterate, there's other programs that we have done, credit programs. If you were to look at how we require manufacturers in the on-road space for the advanced clean truck, we give more credits for larger vehicle classes like class 7 and 8. So they're multiplicative credits for the larger, more challenging vehicle classes. Full credits for some of the middle categories. I forget if it's exactly class 4 through 6, and then the lighter classes, there's fractional credits. So are there things that is that the right way to approach off-road if we were to have a credit system, or is it too diverse and too complex? So those are things that we would like to learn and understand. What does industry think? What do individual companies and other stakeholders think may be an approach, given the wide variety of different portfolios of what individual companies manufacture?
Okay, well, thank you. We remain really interested in that's probably a big area of topic, because with respect to manufacturers, that's really what's going to help people guide decisions and where they choose to invest.
And if there's things I believe, as you mentioned, in ways to encourage investment by manufacturers, if there's things that we can do in the regulatory space to encourage manufacturers to make these investments, we'd like to hear that, if there are things that we should be mindful of or be thinking differently about.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. Next question is from Sai Satish Gouda. You now have permission to speak. You may state your name, affiliation, and your question.
Hello, everyone. This is Sai Satish Gouda from the Propane Education Research Council. There are a lot of other biofuels and renewable fuels that are getting to very low NOx emission standards, or overall net zero carbon intensity from a CO2 standpoint. Why is it that they're not being considered under this when the aim is to mainly reduce NOx and the overall emissions?
Well, thank you, Sai, for that comment. The measure is really looking to advance zero emission product availability in the off-road space, and that is our main focus of this. The technologies that are combustion related, there is a space for that, for certification, for getting credits for those engines. That is the main differentiator of what we're talking about with this measure versus some of our other programs.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next question is from Mark Andres. You now have permission to speak. You must state your name, affiliation, and your question.
Yeah, this is Mark Andres. I'm with Total Industries in Livermore, California. We are, Kim, good to see you. I do a lot with forklifts. We're a Toyota forklift dealer, but we also have electric generator sets for reefer containers. And one of the questions I had asked earlier, just curious, and I think I saw it in portable generators, but I mean, these are fairly large generator sets that get hung on reefer containers to power them between the ship and then getting on the road. And I'm wondering if these apply or where they apply.
Can you, so at a high level, I know that our transportation toxics division is looking at non-truck mounted, TRUs for these, trailer or otherwise, mounted setups. And I believe, if I understood your description correctly, that group is going to be looking at a measure that will address, trailer mounted TRUs. Is that the type of generator you're describing that's either mounted on the bulkhead of the intermodal unit or an underslung on the spline chassis?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's just reason I ask is they're not like a Honda generator that you see with some guy with a, on
Right.
a camping. I mean, these are significant, very large diesel engines and there's thousands of them at every port and outside the ports. So you're thinking that would fall under the TRU piece?
That is my understanding, but we will go back and talk with the staff to double check that to make sure. And our goal is to complement the, overall, this goal of the PACE measure is to complement and not overlap and contradict the other existing regulations that have already been adopted or ones that are in the works. Thank you for that question.
Absolutely.
Next question is from George Lin. You now have permission to speak. You must state your name, affiliation, and your question.
Hi, this is George Lin from Caterpillar. I have two questions. The first one is, when CARB determines which applications are suitable, how are you going to determine that? Is it based on really what manufacturers information or what manufacturers provide you in terms of information, or do you have some kind of preset criteria?
Thanks, George, for that question. No, we don't have any preset criteria. We're very much at a stage of wanting to engage with manufacturers and stakeholders across the spectrum to understand, we have a number of resources that we can see through products that are available in our voucher programs or funded by other means. There's other industry reports that we can see product availability and uptake. But we also very much value manufacturers, take on this and what they see as potential and what their customers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And yeah, thank you. My second question is in regards to H2 ICE versus range extenders versus hybrids. And so when it sounds like ARB would consider range extenders and hybrids, but not H2 ICE. And when I look at those three things, to me it seems like H2 ICE might be the lowest emission, lowest greenhouse gas option of the three. And so why would you not consider H2 ICE if you're considering hybrids and range extenders?
Well, I think I see your point in if we're looking at range extending, combustion powered pieces of equipment, why not include that? I don't think we would exclude that as a fuel type, but what we're looking at is if we were to give potentially, let's say we wanted to look at credits for something that was a range extended, we would really want to be looking at the zero emission range of that piece of equipment. I think that can be an interesting discussion to have about the potential NOx of whatever is the fuel source. Some of the other things that we have concerns about on hydrogen ICE are some of the long-term durability of this as a fuel type. Other things we're looking at are that fuel on the life cycle analysis. So if there's things that you think we should have discussions about or consider in these other fuel spaces, we'll be open to understanding more about that. But we really are trying to make a distinction that H2 ice is not in our eyes a zero emission technology.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, George.
Okay, we have one last question from the audience, and then after that we can move on to the written questions. This question is from Zero Nox Inc. You now have permission to speak. You must state your name, affiliation, and your question.
Thank you, Henry. My name is Juan, and I'm reaching out on behalf of Zero Nox Incorporated. We're involved in the electrification of off-road vehicles retrofits. I was more interested in the part where you were talking about piloting different projects to encourage the move over. I was wondering how that would affect us. Is there a possibility where we can partner to be part of the pilots, or I'm just kind of wondering how we fit into this whole thing that you guys are working on rolling out.
That's a great question. In terms of the demos and pilots, there's a whole nother group of folks at the Air Resources Board that work on our funding portfolio. And they're going to be releasing, I believe it's been indicated on the 11th of October, they'll be publishing a proposal for the coming fiscal year. They've gone through a cycle recently of large solicitation, a lot of different diverse applications for zero emission technologies. I think we're coming up against a really funding constrained time period, and I don't know how much is going to be available, if any, going forward, but we can provide a link in the chat to what the funding program is looking to do. And that will be your best source to understand what that horizon looks like.
All right, perfect. Yeah, thank you. I know that we had put it in the chat previously. You guys can disregard that, but I appreciate it. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
All right, well, we can move on to the questions in the Q&A box. Our first question is from Rosa Vizcarra, which reads, for equipment type on slide 10, are those demos or combination type?
Duncan, can you move to slide 10, please? Thank you. I believe this includes products that are in the development stage as well as commercial production. More details are captured as to the state of the product readiness, I believe, in the staff paper.
Thank you for that, Matt. We have another question from Rosa Vizcarra about the potential alternate approach of more stringent NOx standard to drive greater ZE equipment. Is this an OEM standard, or the fleets will have a tighter emission standard to do it over time?
To answer that, this measure is focused on a manufacturer requirement, not a fleet requirement.
Thanks, Matt. We have another question from Mark Andres. Will diesel-powered generator sets for, I think it's referring to refrigerated containers, apply as portable generators or something else?
I believe this is a question we verbally answered for Mark, and we indicated that for the intermodal containers that come on and off of ships that either have a bulkhead mounted or a underslung mounted diesel generator, that our counterparts in the Transportation and Toxics Division will be handling that equipment type through a separate rulemaking.
Excellent. Our next question is from Mike Madsen of Miller Electric Manufacturing. Does CARB have a definition for portable generators?
I believe we do, and it is captured in our portable air toxics control measure. I don't know that I have that. We can provide that at a later time.
So we dug in a little bit, and I can talk a little bit more about it. I don't want to read it verbatim because it's quite long, but basically portable means designed to be carried from one place to another, not self-propelled. And it becomes stationary if it stays somewhere longer than 12 months. So it's something that's carried around from place to place, but doesn't stay in one place for more than a year. So that's the universe of what's portable. And then we're not really aware of a generator definition, but that's something we could dig into. So maybe if Mr. Madsen wants to elaborate on why the context of why he was thinking about that, that might help steer us to the answer.
Excellent. Our next question is from Veronica Pardo. What complementary purchase requirements do you anticipate for this measure?
I'm not sure what is meant by complementary purchase requirements. If the commenter could elaborate, or
That probably what it is like for ACT and ACF, we have manufacturer requirements, ACT, and then we have complementary requirements on the owners of vehicles to buy those ZE vehicles. So I think that's what they're talking about, and I can answer that right now we are not thinking, we're not planning to propose as part of this rulemaking any kind of requirement on like owners of off-road equipment. Right now, we're envisioning this as purely like a manufacturer side measure.
thank you, Kim.
Excellent. Our next question is from Giselle Aldretti. Will the PACE regulation include the cargo handling equipment at ports?
I believe we answered this earlier. Just to reiterate, we are looking to complement other regulations that are going to be helping to move market segments towards zero emission. The Transportation and Toxic Division within CARB will be working on amendments in the near future for the cargo handling equipment regulation with an emphasis on zero emission. There may be, if there's opportunities for that same equipment that is fits into what we're looking to do for this measure, is used on sites outside of ports and intermodal rail yards, we'd like to hear what that space looks like.
And hi, this is Henry. Just want to remind everyone, if you're writing a written question, be sure to identify your affiliation as well. And also, for those who wish to ask the question verbally, you may also raise your hand, and we will be returning to spoken questions shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Our next question is from Dave Peach. So this is like the HDOH ACT/ACF.
I can take that one. If you're drawing a parallel to our on-road heavy-duty ZE programs, I would say PACE is like ACT, Advanced Clean Trucks, which is just the manufacturer mandate part of that program.
Thank you, Kim. Our next question is from John Reich. On slide 9, the 2027 board hearing and 2031 implementation dates. Is that still the planned dates for PACE, or will there be a delay since the initial planning of TMR?
That is what we are currently aiming for on our board date, and we're looking at the implementation and how that intersects with some of our other programs.
And I would add, so we named it PACE, and we had some proposals in here for doing, going after some equipment types earlier than others. We're thinking of the timing and the SIP for the TMR program to line up with those initial steps here. So for example, we anticipate addressing equipment less than 130 kilowatts, less than 175 horsepower on a later time frame than what's indicated in the SIP for the TMR program.
Thank you, Matt and Kim. Our next question is from Henry Pines. How will the implementation of this rule interact with realistic utility delivery timelines?
as a proposal for a manufacturer requirement, there's more emphasis on the cost and feasibility of the equipment itself to be made. But we are very cognizant of what this equipment, when put into use, will need. And we're working internally and with our partner agencies on if there are going to be impacts or delays. We're working on trying to be consistent in how we handle that as we develop regulations.
Thanks, Matt. So I think I do see a hand raised. Maybe we can answer another question or two in the Q&A and then switch back to that briefly. Our next question is from Dave Peach. If, like ACT, is CARB aware of ACT affecting manufacturers, especially small and specialty manufacturers' ability to sell their equipment/trucks?
This one because this has been a huge part of my life lately. There definitely are some impacts occurring due to some combination of the heavy-duty omnibus standards and CARB's mostly future advanced clean truck requirements. And we have heard some complaints regarding some shortages. And so that's definitely one of the things we're cognizant of as we think about how to set up PACE, because it's actually something we're thinking very strongly about as we work on proposing our Tier 5 off-road diesel standards too, because it's not a win for California, it's not a win for air quality, it's just not a win at all if the result of either Tier 5 or PACE ends up just being driving manufacturers out of California or negatively impacting California dealerships. So we're definitely very aware of this issue on both the on-road and off-road side. And if folks have suggestions for how we can set this up so that it has the positive impact that we're looking for, but avoids any kind of unintended harm to California dealers, California fleets, then we're very open to that kind of input. Thanks for bringing that up, Dave.
Thank you, Kim. Our next question is from Dennis Johnson with US EPA. For your reference to hybrid technologies, how do you envision quantifying the benefits of hybrids? Many machines have unique duty cycles, and it seems characterizing the benefits would require a special test program.
Thank you, Dennis, for that question. Yes, this is something where we, to the best of my knowledge, don't have a equivalent test procedure like we do on the on-road side. And it's something that we would either need to develop internally and or work with stakeholders to develop something that can try to capture something as a start to what does hybridization and or range extending mean for emissions for off-road equipment. If there's suggestions that stakeholders have, if there are things that we should be mindful of that the industry has for duty cycles or other information, we'd be very welcoming of that.
Thank you, Matt. Maybe we'll do this last one and then switch back to Henry for the raised hand. This question is, or maybe more of a comment from Abby Swain, reads, per the question from Orange EV about yard trucks, they are listed here, and then provides one of the PACE website links, then provides a quote from our website. This quote is essentially listing off some of the zero emission off-road equipment that we, I think, are listing on our website. I won't read it all off here verbatim since it's quite long, but essentially it's just saying zero emission off-road equipment representing a broad range of power categories and applications have been commercialized, and then includes a list of some of those equipment. That question should show up in the Q&A if anyone is interested and wants to look back at that. But I think for now, maybe Henry, we can go to the raised hand and then switch back when it makes sense to the Q&A box.
Okay. We have one question from Ian McMillan. You now have permission to speak. You may state your name and affiliation and your question.
Hi there, my name is Ian McMillan. I'm with South Coast AQMD. Kim, good seeing you, et cetera. Really encouraged by this rulemaking. Really also appreciate how you started off talking about criteria pollutants. That's, of course, a very, very big concern for us, and really appreciate that you guys are focusing on that for this rulemaking. I was thinking about some of the conversation here about portable equipment, and I don't know if you've thought about this yet, but if you were thinking of allowing hybrids in the portable equipment space, does that mean you would also be potentially amending the PERP regulation, ATCM, and then trying to see how that also flows through to air district permitting too, if it then sits on a site for more than a year?
Thanks, Ian, for that question. We are very much aware and have been coordinating with the staff who oversee the portable air toxics control measure, as well as the portable equipment registration program, which are fleet-based rules, where this is a manufacturer focus currently. It's not something that we are currently looking to do as a part of this, but it may be something that makes sense down the road. And we would, of course, be looking to coordinate with the air districts to engage with them to understand and look at the overlap where portable equipment and stationary, which can sometimes be the same asset, how those are handled.
Okay, thanks. Really looking forward to this rulemaking. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ian.
Thanks for being here, Ian. And please share ideas if you have them. I know you've given a lot of thought to try to get to zero, how to get to zero in the South Coast. One other thing I want to point out that we've got a lot of great commentary about, well, is the idea that this is a manufacturer requirement, and is there like a affiliated user requirement? And Ian's question kind of related to that, saying, well, if you do this, are you going to have to change the portable equipment air toxic control measure, which is a requirement on owners and users of portable equipment to reflect this? One thing I do want to point out is that CARB already has the in-use off-road diesel reg, which has been in effect for, I think, about 17 years. And it does currently contain zero emission provisions that give some credit for fleets, off-road fleets that use zero emission equipment. And it also has sort of a zero emission option if a fleet prefers, rather than continue to put resources towards like cleaning up their diesel equipment and moving to like higher tier diesel equipment. If a fleet wants to instead go towards more than 50% zero emission equipment, that's an option in CARB's off-road reg. So I say all that just to say that there are currently some sort of related provisions in CARB's existing in-use program for off-road diesel equipment that we would see working in conjunction with PACE.
Okay. We have one question from Bill McGovern. You now have permission to speak. Please state your name, your affiliation, and your question.
Hi, Bill McGavern with the Coalition for Clean Air. Just wanted to say that we really see a need for this rulemaking. We need to do everything we can to reduce diesel emissions and to get into attainment. We know we still have most of the state is in violation of national ambient air quality standards. And so, this is a piece that's part of the SIP and that's going to be needed to get us into attainment. So we look forward to working with all of you to have this go to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
That's all the raised hands for now. We'll go back to written questions.
Thanks, Henry. We have a question from Zeal Tajpuria. CARB plans to introduce PACE for portable generators as a first phase, but usually portable generators are needed when it is difficult to access any electric power sources on the existing infrastructure at a work site. Is this something CARB considered already? What are the options for those sites where it's not feasible?
Thank you, Zeal, for this question. I indicated earlier some of the options that we're currently seeing in this space. We do recognize that many off-road projects exist where the grid does not, or there's limited ability to connect. We see there being options for some of these sites where there is no power to utilize fuel cell generators that are on the market as one option. Is other options pairing battery energy storage with a downsize or right size generator or combination thereof to achieve site needs as one way to reduce emissions on these projects. If there is a limited grid connection, and if that is something that can be buffered to potentially replace a generator as a third option or reduce emissions on, say, a construction project.
Thank you, Matt. The next question is from Wendy Mejia. Is there an idea on which portable generators will have to be ZE?
We're keeping this pretty broad right now. Again, we're in the learning phase. I'd be open to, I don't have a mindset of any sort of limitations on, power. We're not looking to overlap what is required under the SOAR, the small off-road engine regulation. We're looking to complement that and look at other generators. That is what we're looking at currently. Is more or less a full spectrum.
Thanks, Matt. We have a question from Zeronox. Let's see. This is Juan with Zeronox. We specialize in zero emission conversion kits and retrofits. Can you expand on those areas and explain what you meant by pilot programs for equipment not typically zero emission? Are there any incentives for these pilot programs?
I believe we answered this already verbally. Just to reiterate, I would encourage folks to take a look at our funding portfolio of various incentives. There's a website that I believe staff put a link to in the chat, and they have an upcoming announcement on the 11th of October. They plan to release their proposal. That is the best place to take a look at where there might be potential demos and pilots.
Okay,
Thanks,
we can
Matt.
do a few hands right now. Next question is from Dave Peach. You now have permission to speak. You may state your name, affiliation, and your question.
Yeah, this is Dave Peach. I'm a consultant working in this environment and also some other environments. And the primary question I have is equipment equity. And for example, just while you can mention that there's various equipment, zero emission equipment, for example, a Volvo L25E loader. It's a small loader, 40 kilowatt battery. That 40 kilowatt, when you convert it to BTUs and then convert it to, it's about equivalent to about a gallon of diesel fuel. When you compare that to the L25H, which is it's the sister brother of that. That's got a almost 16 gallon tank. So you're talking, even if you look at diesel efficiency versus an electric efficiency, 88% versus an electric, maybe to talk about 45% on diesel efficiency. You're still looking at that the diesel is going to run longer, and it's going to be able to operate longer. We're not even talking about the charging time and other things like that. And I think when you look at these remote locations, or even just you're building a house or something like that, that's going to be problematic and in some respects almost impractical from a financial or even a operational standpoint, is to bring a very big large battery over there to try to recharge your equipment, all your electrical equipment. That's not even talking about getting the original electricity from the grid. But I just kind of want to highlight, I call it equipment equity, is that when you have one piece of equipment that just because it can do some of the work, it can't do the same work And my last example on that would be I own a small gasoline generator, 3,500 watt generator, powered my trailer remotely, the air conditioner remotely. That generator could power it overnight for 8 to 12 hours and run it without a problem, running the 15,000, 13,000 BTU AC plus all the other things on the trailer. The comparison, I also own a Blue Yeti 2 kilowatt, electric battery, basically, that could run it for an hour. The difference in those two pieces of equipment is just immense. And if I have to then get a zero emission generator, i.e. the equivalent of that, to run that for that 8 hour, you're talking I'd have to have multiple different batteries that all of a sudden the cost of the one goes from $1,000. Yes, it has emissions, but it goes from $1,000 to literally over $10,000 for the equivalent Blue Yeti. So that's right. I think when you look at this, you need to look at the equivalency of the equipment that you're replacing, let alone the cost. So.
Well, thank you, Dave, for those comments. We'll definitely take that into consideration as we work on development of this. Appreciate it.
Next question is from Beverly Decho. You now have permission to speak, and you speak your name, affiliation, your question.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Beverly Deschaux. I'm with the Electric Vehicle Association of California Central Coast. I have 3 questions. Should I ask you one at a time and let you answer, or should I rattle them off all at once? Which would you prefer?
How about one at a time?
Okay, good. All right. So if you were to use NOx as your criterion for emissions reduction, are you thinking in terms of making sure that if you were to do that, that it would not interfere with the bigger picture of decarbonization?
Yes, and that's why if we can move to that slide where we discuss that, we have an emphasis on if we were to approach a NOx standard, that we would be looking at a big emphasis on zero emission being a part of how that NOx standard would be achieved.
Okay, so it wouldn't replace it and maybe then have it be lost.
Correct. It maintains the emphasis of a zero emission focus of this measure.
Very good, thank you. When you are speaking of life cycle analysis, is that on equipment only, or would that also be on fuel type as well? And I'm referring specifically to hydrogen, which, as we know, there is no green hydrogen, so-called green hydrogen, to scale at the moment. And often what's just used is regular old gray hydrogen. And then trying to push blue hydrogen, which its only difference is using carbon capture and storage. And I've been listening to many authorities on carbon capture and storage, and it hasn't been proven to even work yet. There's one project where they were promising 90% if they could store the carbon, but they only got 11%, and we aren't sure if it will stay underground, and it's more costly both financially and in terms of energy usage, which would also have its emissions. So what we have with battery electric is that the grid, we are hoping and working on the grid being greened up more so you can plug directly into it. And what we will then have is just a direct, being able to look directly at that we will have increased renewables. On the Central Coast, we have a 60% renewables by 2025 goal, and 100% renewables by 2035, and the state has 100% by 2035. So it seems the additional steps of producing hydrogen, which ends up having 1/3 the energy efficiency of battery electric would be would be a to be accepting hydrogen is to delay decarbonization, is basically what I'm saying. And so I forget what the question was. Oh yes, so as far as life cycle analysis, do you do that? Would that be considered part of a life cycle analysis having to do with fuel cell vehicles? Is that a totally convoluted question? If it is, I'm sorry.
Well, I will try to answer that. Let me know if I
okay.
have answered your question. Okay. So if I heard you correct, you've stated you have some questions and concerns regarding hydrogen at large and some of its ability to be utilized as a zero emission fuel.
Yes.
For a number of reasons. Okay.
Yes.
Through this measure, we still will, are neutral in terms of technology that we see as potential zero emission technologies, which include fuel cell and battery electric. We have other programs within the agency that account for what you're describing through our low carbon fuel standard that looks at the energy intensity, carbon intensity of the different fuels that our economy uses. We are not looking to overlap with those efforts. This is an effort that is looking to provide a path forward to encourage more zero emission equipment, and ultimately is up to manufacturers and customers what technologies they will choose. But fuel cells is a part of that mix that we're considering.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And so if our ultimate goal is reducing our greenhouse gas emissions significantly enough to affect the climate in a positive way, to not consider that, to not consider that is to not take in the full picture, is what I'm saying. And so in effect, we are stalling our progression toward decarbonization in reality, not just like on the books of what we say, okay, we decided fuel cells, okay. But so I'm suggesting that that needs to be considered. I strongly suggest it, because otherwise we're just fooling ourselves and we're just wasting our time sitting here having these conversations and making new equipment and all of that, because it's not taking us to where we're saying we want to go, what our actual goals are.
Well, thank you, Beverly, for those comments. We'll take that under consideration.
Okay, and the final question I have is that I don't know if the excuse me, if the bill it has passed and is signed by the governor yet, having to do with bidirectional capacity. There are a lot of questions people are saying about their batteries, the storage, having to do with their backup. So are you thinking in terms of the future for that? So equipment that would be large equipment that would be battery electric would have a large battery storage to have the potential. So I'm promoting the idea of that it would have the potential to, if the grid went down, there's a big fat battery there that's got a lot of storage that could be available for the rest of the production of what's needed until the grid comes back up. So is that something that you are promoting or talking about or thinking about?
Well, what we're talking about in terms of equipment types are portable pieces of equipment that are generally, as we stated earlier, utilized on sites up to 1 year. I think what you're describing are assets that would be more long-lived for, backup power. Is that accurate?
Yes, actually I am. Yes, you're right.
So we're talking about a different type of system But to your point about standards, I think that if there are standards that we should be looking at for the types of equipment we're looking to have brought into the fold of the PACE proposed measure, we would, if bidirectional capability is something, and there's standards that we can point to, and that would be beneficial for both manufacturers and end users, that would be welcome for us to get feedback on if they're on standards we may look to incorporate. So we can further advance portable equipment as well as equipment that may tie into that is mobile.
Well, the reason that I mentioned is because then it could eliminate the need for that extra piece of equipment. You've already got it in your vehicle. You don't have to pay for it a second time. We just had a demo over the weekend of a Ford F-150 Lightning truck that has bidirectional capacity, and it had a bunch of home appliances plugged into it. It had a heat pump and an induction cooktop and a bunch of other things plugged into it. So I guess maybe I'm saying that let's see, that can be promoted as a good thing, as an additional selling point for why someone would choose a battery electric vehicle, that it could eliminate the need for having some extra equipment for backup.
Well, thanks for those comments, Beverly.
Thank you. Thanks for all your work.
And that is the last raised hand for now. We're going to move back to written questions for now.
Thanks, Henry. Our next question is from Eric Schmitter. It's a two-part question. The first part is, with the emissions on forklifts already being regulated and meeting standards, how was the decision made to include forklifts in converting to all electric? That's part one.
So maybe, excuse me, maybe I can take this one. Yeah, and as Mr. Schmitter refers to, in June of this year, our board did approve for adoption the zero emission forklift regulation, which is a requirement both, it basically bans manufacturers from selling new propane forklifts after like model year 2026. And then it requires fleets that have existing spark ignition forklifts to gradually phase those out, with the hope being that folks are switching over to zero emission forklifts. So I think it's an excellent point that we want to make sure that we think about what's already required as part of the zero emission forklift rule as we set up the scope for PACE. Like, for example, if we gave a lot of credit for manufacturers making zero emission forklifts and we already have this companion program that's pushing hard towards zero emission forklifts, it wouldn't really make a lot of sense. So at least on initial read, what we're thinking is it would not make sense to include spark ignition manufacturers of forklifts in PACE, but it would make sense to include the compression ignition ones because those aren't covered in the zero emission forklift rule. And we may also want to pull in the manufacturers of class 5 forklifts over 12,000 pounds lift capacity, which are also not included in the zero emission forklift measure. But it's an excellent point, and similar to the other questions that folks had about, what about TRUs? What about SOAR? We need to, as we craft this, we need to make sure that we're not just complicating things and, duplicating standards for equipment that's already covered by other measures. So appreciate that comment. You want me to take the rest? Mr. Schmitter goes on to ask, also, the majority of forklifts in our area are operated in warehouses that have air filtration prior to it leaving the building. Would there be an exception for companies that have buildings that meet a certain standard to not affect air quality? Well, as I said, so for propane forklifts, manufacturers of propane forklifts probably won't get pulled into PACE because they're already covered by the zero emission forklift rule. The zero emission forklift rule does apply to fleets of forklifts, even if they're used inside a warehouse, with the idea that if you're emitting NOx, eventually is going to make its way outside and eventually is going to be contributing to ambient air pollution. So that's why we didn't have any kind of exemption for forklifts used indoors. But if you have more questions about zero emission forklift, just reach out to us and we can help with the implementation of that program.
Thank you, Kim. Moving on to the next question from Mariela Raucho. Not a question, but more of a comment. Thank you for following up on the 2022 SIP commitment to advance zero-emission technology in the off-road space. We look forward to engaging on this rule and believe that it will have a significant benefit to local and regional air quality and public health. We'll follow up with additional comments going forward. So probably just move on to the next entry, which is from Carrie Roulet. Would it be possible to clarify how the term feasibility will be defined by CARB for the purpose of this rule?
Thanks, Carrie, for that question. We don't have a set definition of what we're going to have in terms of feasibility, but overall, things we take into consideration are product availability, the ability for a piece of equipment or equipment type to be worked into existing operations, the amount of infrastructure that is needed to support a piece of equipment, and other considerations in that from a technical feasibility. There's also a cost feasibility that is something that we look at. We look at the cost of the piece of equipment and other factors related to shifting markets and manufacturers towards different powertrain technologies and manufacturing of them as well, amongst other things that we take into account. If you have other questions or want to follow up with us individually, we'd appreciate that.
Thanks, Matt. As a friendly reminder to folks typing in questions or comments into the Q&A, please remember to include your affiliation so we can read that out along with your question or comment. Our next is from Hunter Ekstrom. Under PACE, is CARB considering any concept certification pathway for non-road zero emissions drivetrains or components? Or is CARB planning to mirror any ZEV certification activities to non-road?
Thanks, Hunter, for this question. The answer is maybe. We did include this on one of the slides as something that we're considering. We currently do not have. Today we certify off engines that get incorporated into equipment. The zero emission powertrains that are incorporated into off-road piece of equipment today, and those pieces of equipment do not need to be certified by CARB. But we do have under our Tier 5 proposal, Tier 5 off-road compression engine standards, there is a pathway that is being proposed that would be based around manufacturers' desire to generate credits. Is one thing that will likely precede us. And we're coordinating with them to align as best we can what they're looking to do and what we may be looking to do as well. If there's elements of a potential certification that you would like us to consider, we encourage you to reach out to both the PACE team as well as the Tier 5 team.
Thanks, Matt. Kyle Schmidt asks, many zero-emission ag equipment manufacturers' ability to market and sell equipment into California is being limited by the current restriction on autonomous vehicles, and many operators do not want to face the possibility of purchasing equipment twice or having to retrofit newer equipment once autonomous equipment becomes allowed. Completely acknowledging that CARB does not have the authority to change the rule prohibiting its use, has there been any consideration for trying to work with other agencies to help push the entire industry and its application forward on a common timeline?
Thank you, Kyle, for this question. I am not familiar with the restriction that you're referring to. If you would like to follow up with us offline, I see you have your hand raised. Actually, why don't we switch over to Kyle, who has his hand raised right now?
Yes, I have given permission to speak. You may go ahead and state your name and affiliation and respond to the panel.
Yeah, thank you for that. Kyle Schmidt with the Wine Group. We're a wine grape grower and producer in California. Currently, Cal OSHA has a very old prohibition that limits unmanned agricultural equipment to be used in a field. There are very small exceptions to that, and it is something that has been an ongoing discussion before Cal OSHA and its standards board for years now. Manufacturers petitioning to be allowed to do trials to essentially prove the safe function of this equipment. It's something that the ag industry is very, very interested in, and it really is a huge hurdle for a lot of larger scale ag growers to getting into electrification, because the autonomous nature, and it's currently available. It's not new technology. It's used in other states. But not being able to go autonomous with what is available in zero emission is a big financial consideration for the ag industry. And I fully acknowledge, again, it's not CARB's space. I get that. I just curious if there had been any interagency discussion, as you know, both of these efforts unintentionally are very, very aligned in the ag space.
Well, thank you, Kyle, for this comment. This is something I was unaware of. I'd be curious to follow up offline to understand, the citation you referenced.
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to have more discussions or have others. I know there are a lot of equipment manufacturers that would be very interested in discussing not only the zero emission nature of their equipment, but the challenges they're having because of this.
Yes, because autonomous equipment does not necessarily mean zero emission.
It does not, but a vast majority of the development in autonomous equipment is heading towards zero emission. It's just an application of the newest available technology in the ag industry.
Understood. All right. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
Okay. Continuing with the written questions, we have a question from Jung Ho Kim from Hyundai Infracore. He actually has 5 questions, so I'll read one at a time. Regarding the Tier 5 rulemaking, CARB does not consider the hybrid powertrain for ZE credit, but in case of PACE, CARB is considering the hybrid system for ZE solution. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, that is something that we are considering. We'd like feedback if that's something that we should include, or if we should be looking at, beyond technologies beyond outside of, and beyond hybrid, use cases to more range extended or zero emission technologies strictly.
Question number 2. And according to the presentation, PACE will be proceeded as 3 phases. I think CARB has a plan about the portion of sales in California of each of the phases. Could you let me know?
Let me just reread this. So right now, this is too early for us to have a discussion in this meeting regarding sales for any of these. We have not, locked ourselves into, exact equipment types or, sales targets. This is where we want feedback from manufacturers of what they see is the potential, so that we can help craft something that, moves the industry, but also isn't, disjointed from, what is the potential to bring as much zero emission equipment as possible to California.
Question number 3. If the equipment manufacturer and the powertrain manufacturer of zero emission equipment are different, who gets the ZE credit for Tier 5?
That's a good question. We're going to be coordinating internally. I believe that with our Tier 5 counterparts, I believe that the Tier 5 team has largely looked at setting up a short-term credit program that will sunset and will largely probably be taken over by the PACE measure. How all those pieces will align in space and time is to be determined. But we are looking at coordination of that so that that is taken into consideration. Don't know if our Tier 5 folks have something they'd like to say on this.
Yeah, I can comment on that, Matt.
Thanks,
So
Jenna.
we don't have our regulation order or proposed regulation order out yet. It should be out probably by tomorrow with our slide deck. But yes, the equipment manufacturers would get credit based on our proposal. So we'll be releasing both our draft regulation language as well as and then a couple months from that we'll be releasing our test procedures. But our plan now is for equipment manufacturers to get that credit.
Thanks, Jenna.
Question number 4. While CARB does not consider hydrogen internal combustion engines for zero emission H2 ICE, but is considering the hybrid for, while CARB isn't considering internal combustion hydrogen for zero emission, it is considering hybrid systems for zero emission. Why does CARB think this way?
The reason we're thinking about this as, hydrogen combustion is a technology that belongs in the discussion with engine certification, as it is a consumed fuel in that regard, and has emissions. We're not looking to have that brought into the discussion about zero emission technologies. I can understand from the manufacturer standpoint that we're looking at hybrid systems, but we're looking at how we can really emphasize the zero emission aspect of these systems to have robust hybrids that are zero emission capable. Those are the type of lines that we're thinking about.
And question number 5, is PACE mandatory for equipment manufacturers, powertrain manufacturers, or both?
For PACE, we're leaving that door open right now. As Jenna Latt on the Tier 5 measure alluded to, they're looking at a requirement that they have equipment that, equipment manufacturers will generate credits. I'm not sure what we're going to be looking at as a mechanism, whether we should be regulating the equipment manufacturers, the powertrain, or both have a place to play under the PACE measure. We welcome feedback from industry on what might be one or more paths to consider.
Thank you. Those were the questions from Jung-Ho Kim of Hyundai Infracore. Next question is from Adam Carey. Can you confirm where you are in the regulatory process for this regulation?
So we are at the very beginning stages. This is our first public work group meeting. We're going to be setting up a number of different discussions with industry groups and individual companies. And we welcome any and all feedback from stakeholders. One thing I want to do is just going back on the hydrogen ICE discussion. We really would like to discuss with industry what the potential role of hydrogen ICE is for PACE, but just to reemphasize, we do not consider it a zero emission technology.
Okay. Also another question from Adam Carey. Also, one thing to consider for manufacturers is that they can allow equipment for sale, but you can't force people to buy them. Creating a regulation on percentage of sales might have some challenges.
Thank you, Adam, for that comment.
Okay, next question is from Debalt Taliu. In our experience in Europe, NOx emissions restrictions has been a big driver to encourage adoption of zero-emission generators in the Netherlands. That was just a comment.
Thank you.
that comment. And if anyone has suggestions for us based on like local requirements or countries' requirements in Europe, we would very much welcome that. We're aware of some things that are happening over there, but I'm sure there's things that we're not aware of.
Okay, the next suggestion is from Bruce Farber. Suggestion: consider a fourth work group addressing issues associated with powertrain conversions. Could address certain requirements, split warranties. Could address certification requirements, split warranties, interfaces, and service for ZE powertrains that replace ICE powertrains.
Thank you for that, Bruce. And just before we jump off that comment, there are some certification requirements under Tier 5. So Bruce, if you're not following the Tier 5 rulemaking, I would encourage you to take a look at what they'll be posting soon on that effort.
The next,
Can I go back and just add oh, sorry, Henry, let me just say one thing. Adam Perry had asked, where are you in the regulatory process for this regulation? This is our first public workshop, so up to now, we've only been kind of working on this internally. It was an idea that's included in our SIP strategy, but this is our first kind of public commencement of the process for this. And we are aiming for a 2027 board date. Like that would be when the board would vote up or down on this. And the idea is that it would take effect by 2031. And that's for the earliest part of this. We recognize that there's parts of the whole universe of off-road equipment that we wouldn't be covering in that first step. Sorry, Henry, go ahead.
That's great, because another question from Thomas Green asked the exact same thing, so you answered that question. So the next question or suggestion is from David Hayward. I would encourage CARB to give serious consideration of hybrid products. ZEVs are great, but not practical in many applications. As an example, we have added 8 1-yard battery powered we've added 8 1-yard battery powered Volvo wheel loaders to our rental fleet in California. Have had them from 6 months to 1 year. None of them are on rent today. Essentially, they can't work an 8-hour shift, and users don't have adequate infrastructure to charge. All of our comparable diesels are on rent. Conversely, we have been adding Genie hybrid man lifts to our fleet. They are still diesel, but are 24 horsepower versus 49 horsepower, and the engine runs solely to charge the batteries. No resistance from customers to rent. Our cost of the product is comparable to that of a conventional, so higher rates don't need to be charged. Helps overall inflation rates. Would encourage CARB to be open to hybrids being a good alternative and not thrown out simply because they are diesel.
Thank you for that comment, David.
The next question is from Jason Miller. I represent a mobile emissionless generator manufacturer. How do I get my product eligible for CARB funding? I believe we have something unique for this space. I do not see anything on the core site under mobile power units or landscape that matches my product in size and mobility. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Jason. I'm not sure if we have anybody from our core program on the call, but please reach out. We can try to get you connected with them if you haven't been able to already. I believe they have some minimum threshold for power output or minimum capacity for eligibility, but the staff can speak better to the current requirements.
Next, I'm going to go over to a raised hand from George Lin. You now have permission to speak. Please state your name and affiliation and your question. George Lin. George Lin, there.
Yeah, raised hand. That's my mistake.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Next question is from Dennis Johnson of US EPA. With difficulty in charging non-road equipment in remote locations, what does CARB do to prohibit or limit the use of diesel generators to charge electric equipment?
Let me just reread this 1 second. Well, I don't know that we're currently doing anything in this space, but in terms of what we're considering in PACE, we're looking at encouraging technologies that would ultimately reduce fuel burn and costs, and the need to bring, and also footprint for, worksite considerations. I don't know if I'm fully answering this.
I can chime in on this
Sure.
one. So PACE is envisioned as a manufacturer requirement. And so like as let's say we did decide to pose PACE as a percent of sales requirement or something, we would then have to figure out, well, what percent of sales is like technically feasible and reasonable on what time frame. And looking at the existing like charging infrastructure and the utility plans for improving that charging infrastructure and capacity over time would help inform where we would set those targets, because we wouldn't want, like, if we just said, oh, 100% electric sales, ZE sales starting tomorrow, and we ended up with a bunch of people charging electric equipment off of diesel generators, that'd be really counterproductive. This issue came up a lot in the context of our recent zero emission forklift rulemaking, where it was sort of a similar situation where, we're talking to fleets and saying, okay, we have this phase out schedule, you got to get rid of your propane forklifts. And some of the fleets were telling us, well, wait, I operate these out in a really remote area, and the utility is telling me they're not going to have the capacity for years for me to be able to charge zero emission forklifts. So do you want me to buy zero emission forklifts and charge them from a generator? And that was, we thought, a very reasonable point to make. And so as part of the crafting the zero emission forklift rulemaking, we built in infrastructure delay provisions, operational feasibility provisions, anywhere where we thought the rule might push towards an unintended consequence of increasing diesel use. We tried to craft in provisions to prevent that from happening.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Next question is from Clara Broadkey. Can you provide a list of the questions asked? Oh, sorry. There will be a video available, I believe. Next question is from Colin
Sorry,
Swears.
just to chime in on that. Yeah, we generally don't transcribe all the questions or our answers back, but we do plan to post videos. So if anybody missed to go back and look again, that would be the way to do it. Sorry, Henry, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Colin Swears with the Western Propane Gas Association. Is it the intention to have this rule supplant the PERP rule?
Thank you, Colin, for that question. The intent of this program is to be a manufacturer mandate. We are not looking at this time to have this rule update the fleet rule or PERP.
Okay, sorry. Okay, the next question is from Yanbin Mo. Does the third phase require federal preemption waiver for ag and CE equipment? AG and CE equipment.
Kim, do you want to take this one?
Yes, our current understanding is, yeah, we think it would require a waiver, but we'll be looking into the details of that in conjunction with our legal office as we move forward with this. And of course, we'd be applying for any necessary waiver or authorization. And ag means it's agricultural and construction equipment. CARB is federally preempted by the Clean Air Act from regulating new farm and construction equipment under 175 horsepower / 130 kilowatts. So that's what this question is about.
Thank you, Kim. Next question is from Greg Laudermilch. Can you please expand, Greg at Danar. Can you please expand on fleet requirements? I believe there is a stronger dependency between OEM and fleet. For example, in the absence of a fleet regulation, but just an OEM regulation, a potential scenario for fleets could buy equipment out of state and bring it into California, which would potentially meet OEM regulations, but potentially disadvantage local contractors. Seeking clarity.
Thank you, Greg, for that comment. Currently, we're not proposing a fleet element to be included in this phase of the PACE proposal. This has been brought up by a number of stakeholders. If this is something that stakeholders feel we should consider, we will take that back and discuss it. But right now, this is very much a manufacturer mandate requirement proposal.
Can add a little bit there. So CARB's in-use program that covers anything mobile, off-road diesel, 25 horsepower and up, but exempts ag, was last amended in 2022. So we don't have plans to open that up like in the immediate future. However, as part of the recent discussions concerning the South Coast Air District's SIP and a potential US EPA disapproval of that SIP, CARB did make the commitment to look at revising that in-use rule once EPA adopts their version of the Tier 5 standards. And so the zero emission provisions, like the Zeta provisions that I mentioned, those are new in the 2022 amendments. And I would envision that, if we're picking this rule up to amend it again and 3 years or 5 years or whatever that actually happens, that looking at those zero emission provisions again and hopefully trying to expand those would be one thing that would be on the table. And thinking about how to make that rule work well with the PACE program, assuming that the PACE would be in place by then, would definitely be in our minds then.
Thank you. The next submission is from George Lin, who is responding to Kim regarding the definition of gensets in the 40 CFR 1039.801 definitions. A generator set engine means an engine used primarily to operate an electrical generator or alternator to produce electric power for other applications. Federal Register, Volume 69, Number 124, Tuesday, June 29, 2004, page 38980. For the purpose of determining which non-road engines are subject to the generator set standards, we are defining a generator set engine as an engine used primarily to operate an electrical generator or alternator to produce electric power for other applications. This definition makes it clear that generator set engines do not include engines used in machines, such as mine trucks that do mechanical work, but that employ engine-powered electric motors to propel the machine. But they do include engines in non-road equipment for which the primary purpose is to generate electric power, even if the machine is also self-propelled. The next comment is from David Hayward from Herc Rentals. If you will be addressing generators in this regulation, how will that impact PERP versus off-road in-use? PERP is expensive and slow. The door system is free and pretty user-friendly. Can PERP be rolled into doors? That could be a plus for owners.
Well, I just have to say how delighted that makes me feel. And I know our team that runs the Doors program, including Henry, who's actually the lead programmer for Doors, are smiling inside because of this statement. We don't have any immediate plans to try to subsume the PERT program into Doors. They do have some special requirements that they have to work around because they are so closely linked with the district. Permitting programs for portable equipment that we don't have to worry about. So that may explain some of the cumbersome nature of their program compared to Doors. But thank you for the suggestion. I'm definitely going to pass that along to our Doors team.
Thank you. Next question is from Zero Knox Incorporated. Could you share the link for the pilot program incentive information, please? I might have missed it. From Zero Knox Off-Road Retrofit Conversions.
For Zero Knox, we can follow up offline if we haven't already dropped in the appropriate link to get you right into the demos and pilots. I think we might have previously provided a link to our overall funding plan. I'm happy to do that after today's meeting.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Joe Locksterkamp. Do you have timeline goals for implementation for each of the 3 potential phases?
Thank you for that question, Joe. In short, we don't have the full timeline for all 3 phases. As Kim pointed out earlier, we're for this first phase looking to have that match with what our SIP commitment was to go to our board in 2027, with right now a proposed implementation in the 2031 timeframe. Later phases are still to be determined.
Thank you. Next, from Mike Mason. CARB often uses the term feasible/infeasible. How does CARB determine feasibility or infeasibility? Are there any type guidelines available that explain this?
This is a very perceptive question. So no, we haven't gone through rulemaking to define what we mean by feasible. As we work through any rulemaking, we're always thinking about technical feasibility and cost effectiveness and the impact on the economy. And we're trying to listen to concerns from potentially regulated parties. But this is a very perceptive question because one person's feasible, maybe somebody else's infeasible. And for example, in one of the earlier slides here that when Matt was giving the background, one of the mandates that we're responding to in crafting this measure is Executive Order 7920. And that explicitly lays out and says, well, go 100% zero emission for off-road where feasible. And so there's a lot of judgment and analysis and policy decision making that falls within figuring out what's feasible. So I guess my hope here is that if folks have suggestions for how they think we should be thinking about that, please let us know. We typically, some things that we consider when we're thinking about what's technically feasible, we're looking at what's commercially available. If there's not something commercially available, then we're looking at what's been demonstrated, we're doing literature searches to see, what's being done in the lab scale or bench scale, what predictions are people making about how technology will change over time. We're kind of thinking about all those kinds of things when we set up these programs with a long time frame. And oftentimes, we're setting up programs that look out 10, 20 years in the future and that sort of drive what becomes commercially feasible, right? We had light duty ZEV mandates in place before light duty ZEVs were broadly available. So those sort of like, what do we want the future to look like? Those sort of questions also figure into what we think is feasible or infeasible. We also look in great detail at cost, and we look at impacts on affected businesses, including large and small businesses. And we look at the impacts on the overall California economy. And we're kind of taking all of that into account when staff proposes a proposal for what we think is feasible, right? And then it's really the board's decision as to whether they agree that what staff proposes is feasible, or sometimes they think we aren't pushing hard enough. They send us back to push harder. And sometimes they hear from stakeholders that say staff's gone too far, and they ask us to slow down or add exemptions, that kind of thing. But just I really encourage you, if you have suggestions for what things we should be taking into account, please share the details with us. And the more data driven, the better. So if there's studies you can point to or cost data you have that you think we should be looking at, that's super helpful if you could share with us.
Thanks, Kim. Next, from Ankit Tyagi, as with this PACE program, ARB is looking to regulate equipment manufacturers to sell certain percentage of equipment to be ZEV. What efforts will ARB make so that end users, especially non-fleet owners, will buy those equipment?
So this is I'll reiterate that our current proposal does not include a fleet element. It's currently only a manufacturer requirement. We've heard from a number of stakeholders that stated the question as to why we don't include this, or would we include this. And this is something that if stakeholders feel strongly that we should consider, we're open to listen to that. But the current proposal does not include that. We do have other regulations that we have passed that are mandates on manufacturers, but do not have them on fleets. An example of this is our light duty on-road space, where manufacturers have requirements of making zero emission and zero emission capable vehicles, but there are no requirements on the public at large to buy those. It is up to the manufacturers to sell them, as well as other regulations. But that is what we're currently looking at. If you have thoughts of how we might consider, if you feel strongly, Ankit or others, regarding a fleet measure, please reach out to us.
Thank you, Matt. Next, we have Rakesh Malhotra from Agco Corp. By not including hydrogen ICE in PACE, ARB is by default discouraging the overall hydrogen fuel infrastructure development, thereby negatively impacting fuel cell rollout. But PACE is encouraging hybrids and range extenders because they include batteries. So, is the intention of PACE to decarbonize and reduce emissions, or simply encourage battery adoption?
Overall, we're trying to get with PACE as many emissions across the board, whether they be greenhouse gas or NOx. We have heard from a number of stakeholders that want us to include hydrogen internal combustion technologies. I will reiterate that we do not consider hydrogen internal combustion to be in the same category as zero emission. We're open to a conversation about how hydrogen could be thought of in this space. I think that this is something that, again, we've had a lot of questions, and we really would, we don't want to close it. We want to hear stakeholders, reasoning for why this is, important to them and how we should consider it. But we do consider them very different categories.
Thanks, Matt. Thomas Green from Rancho Water asks, what is Tier 5?
Tier 5, Thomas, thanks for that question. We speak in a lot of acronyms. The Tier 5 compression ignition off-road regulation is a proposed measure that CARB staff are currently working on to further reduce emissions in the off-road diesel engine space, for lack of a better term. This is a step beyond the existing Tier 4 requirements that have been in place for a number of years. We have some links we can probably draw up in the chat so we can direct you to what is going on in that space. There's an upcoming workshop on October 8th if you're interested in learning more about what staff will be proposing. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. Next from Kyle Schmidt. Not a question. The regulatory citation regarding having an operator in the vehicle is found at Title 8, Subchapter 7, Group 3, Article 13, Section 3441B. Cal OSHA has reinforced this to mean that an operator must be on the vehicle, not remotely controlled, at all times if there are any other individuals in the same field.
Thank you for providing that definition and citation, Kyle.
We have another entry from Ankit Tyagi. As with this PACE program, ARB is looking to regulate equipment manufacturers to sell certain percentage of equipment to be ZEV. I think this question was actually already answered now that I read it because it's regarding what efforts we'll make so that end users will buy equipment. I think it's a repeat. My apologies. Another from Thomas Green. Diesel generators are generally only permitted for emergency usage, thus under 200 hours per year. If the generator is intended to be used more, it has to be other fuels like natural gas.
Thank you for this question, Thomas. I want to make a distinction. If I'm interpreting your statement in question correctly, you're referring to what are stationary, emergency backup generators. We're talking in the PACE world for this proposal are portable generators that fall outside of those restrictions. Because we have portable generators, we have generators that are stationary, and then we have generators that are emergency backup that have different, different permitting and different restrictions on their use.
Thank you, Matt. Next from Mayant Win, are lawn and garden equipment part of agriculture? How does this contribute to slide 7?
Let me go to slide 7 real quick. Lawn and garden equipment part of agriculture. I don't believe they fall into the agricultural. We have a very specific definition of equipment that is used in field. And when I hear of lawn and garden equipment, that is, unless I'm mistaken, is generally considered not something that is in field agricultural production. I believe that falls into the other category, is what was relayed to us from our inventory team.
Thank you, Matt. Next from Greg Loudermilk. Does this proposed rule have any end-of-life or recycling requirements for the OEM for the off-road ZEVs being supported by this rule? These aspects need to be understood clearly and early for OEMs.
I don't know that that's something that we have internally discussed, but if this is something that stakeholders feel we should regarding recyclability of equipment that may be required to be manufactured and brought for sale in the state, we'd like to hear more about that. Thank you for that comment.
Thank you. Next from Jake Spielberger. This seems to be a multi-part question, so I'll just read one part at a time. For off-road job sites requiring mass energy consumption for heavy equipment, etc., has CARB conducted studies to see if solar generation is feasible to suit demand?
To the best of my knowledge, we have not, but we will look into that.
Okay, the next part. Have calculations been conducted for the additional emissions or energy consumption from road-going vehicles to transport large batteries and potentially solar panels to job sites?
No. is, I believe, the short answer. But we are working, on other measures to reduce the on-road heavy-duty emissions through our advanced clean truck and advanced clean fleet rules, regardless if that equipment is transporting batteries and solar panels, support, zero emission off-road equipment.
Thank you. The next component is, will these sites
Actually, sorry.
Go ahead, Kim.
Sorry to jump in. I wanted to add one thing to Mr. Loudermilk's question, who asked about end of life or battery recycling requirements. I did want to mention that there's a lot of work going on in this area, because of course there's a lot of batteries associated with light duty cars, heavy duty trucks, where there's, CARB has very aggressive regulations. So I dropped a link into the chat for where you can read more about battery life cycle and battery recycling efforts that are going on. Sorry to cut off there, Zach.
No worries at all. Thank you, Kim. The next component of Jake Spielberger's question is, will these sites even have the operational space for panels and batteries?
Jake, I don't know that we can fully answer that. Every site's going to be different. I think as we work through this, rulemaking process, we're going to learn a lot. We're going to understand what are some of the footprint limitations that stakeholders deal with, and through that, find out what are some of the options that may be available today and into the future to reduce emissions, whether it be from, portable equipment and or mobile equipment.
Thank you. The next component is, can the current electrical grid support a rapid change in demand from multiple heavy industries in a short period of time?
To answer that, we have been working with our partners and other state agencies who do regulate the utilities in California. We are coordinating to the best of our ability to, make sure that our regulations, align. And if there are spaces where there's delays, we have a consistent messaging about potential delay requirements.
Thank you.
And I can add, so there's a lot of work going on to try to make sure that as CARB adopts and contemplates various programs that would impose additional demand on the grid, that information gets conveyed timely to CEC, CPUC, and the relevant utilities. So in the past, there hasn't really been a need for like really rapid communication there, but now that these programs are are changing the demand and projected to change the demand over time, a more timely kind of connection among those agencies is needed. And our infrastructure team here has been sort of setting that up and making sure that information flows quickly. And like, for example, when we developed the zero emission forklift regulation, we had a lot of involvement from utilities and suggestions. And like one of the very first requirement that regulation has is a requirement for fleets that are looking at electrification of their forklifts to start talking to utilities so that there can be that communication about, is there enough capacity, and if not, how do you arrange to get it?
Thank you. It looks like the final question component from Jake Spielberger is CARB or PACE actively bolstering infrastructure or providing solid researched solutions to manufacturers in any way to facilitate this massive change in industry?
So
go ahead, Matt.
CARB has had a long history of supporting research and development, whether it be mobile equipment, portable equipment, mobile power units that can displace, generator use. We have also seen their incorporation into our voucher incentive programs. So we have been using a lot of the tools at our disposal to help this industry have some encouragement from the manufacturer side to develop, and encouragement for these early adopting fleets to begin the transition and piloting of this equipment to see how it works for their operational needs. And we will continue to look for ways in which we can use the limited funds that were appropriated to continue to help move the needle in the off-road space. But we recognize that this is a large ask, and we're also asking for feedback from industry to help us understand, what are some of the, limitations that they see given our proposal.
Thank you. The final component of Jake's entry is a comment stating, as others have stated, it seems like squeezing manufacturers will potentially squeeze them out of California.
The goal of PACE is not to squeeze manufacturers out of the California market. We are trying to use this measure to encourage a transition to cleaner available equipment for fleets to consider to use. And we would like feedback from Jake and others, if you feel this way, about what we should be considering as we go through this rulemaking development process, so that we don't force companies out of the California market and can complement how these zero emission, range extended, and other technologies can be incorporated to be best available to bring into the California market.
Thank you. Next, we have another question from Zeel Tajpuria of Kubota Engine America. CARB says regulation would apply to equipment and powertrain manufacturers. They ask, what is the definition of powertrain manufacturers? Does it include engine manufacturers?
Thank you for this question, Zeel. At a high level, yes, we're talking about the manufacturer that develops. In the engine world, it is an engine. In the electrical world, a lot of times, we refer to that as a powertrain. So we're looking at that as one and the same. If it makes sense for us to focus the PACE measure on those that manufacture the powertrain, so some of that may be vertically integrated within companies, some of that may be sourced third party, integrated into somebody's existing piece of equipment. Or if we should stick with equipment as the focus of the regulation, or if there's a path for both.
Thank you, Matt. Our final, for the time being, entry in the Q&A box is from Brianna Johnson, and it reads, how does CARB plan to increase its electricity output without reliance on electricity imports from states that use coal-powered refineries or other non-renewable sources, such as natural gas, in order to maintain alignment with California's clean energy and emissions reduction goals?
I can jump in on this one if you want, Matt.
Sure.
So first, I should just acknowledge that CARB is not the lead state agency for maintaining the grid or electricity planning. But we definitely recognize that our programs have an impact on electrical demand. And as I mentioned before, we're trying to make sure all the necessary communication is happening so that the state is sort of proceeding with one mind. Towards overhauling how we power almost everything. And we definitely get, and our colleagues at CEC, CPUC, and utilities get what a daunting transformation this is that the state is attempting, but there's a recognition from the governor and from legislators that this is just absolutely crucial, that we have to do this in order to address climate change. And seeing all the really extreme weather events and fires, it's pretty universally accepted now that climate change is a big problem and it's affecting California. And so that's why there is this policy commitment to try to overhaul how we power everything. And I'm going to drop in the chat some a relevant link regarding longer term planning for grid capacity that may be of use if you want to delve into that a little bit more.
Thank you. As I said, that is the final entry in the Q&A box for the time being. yeah, so we can, I suppose, give it a moment to see if any additional ones pop up.
And there are also no raised hands at the moment.
So before people drop off, I just want to say really excellent comments and questions today. Like there were definitely things here I had never heard of before, like all the autonomous ag equipment stuff. So really appreciate people taking time out of their day to share their thoughts with us. And if anybody was thinking they, had stuff they wanted us to know that they didn't want to announce in front of hundreds of other people, please do reach out to us. We have a great team working on this program, and we will make time to talk with you. And we're really at the beginning of deciding how to craft this measure. There's a lot of creativity I think we can use to try to put this together in a way that really is helpful. So please help us. The more experts in the field talk to us and share their opinions, the better job we can do.
And additionally, I would like to just thank everybody who participated and attended and listened in, and for those who will be tuning into the recorded version of this in the days and weeks to come. We will be posting the link to the recorded version of this discussion on our website probably within a week or so. I want to remind and encourage everybody to sign up for the email distributions that is specific to this measure. Future announcements will likely be to a much more limited audience versus the tens of thousands of people that received this invitation twice now to join us today. If there's no further questions, thank you again and have a good evening, everyone.
All right, have a good evening. The webinar will be ending right now.